welcome to the next discussion as we continue the analysis of the Dr Peterson personality course that he did in 2015. We did this a few weeks ago and we had a bunch of stuff come up. So I'm glad to get back to it, and I've done the next two lectures of his on Jean Piaget, most famous for child psychology, but according to Peterson is very influential and important for Carl Jung. And he argues that for Carl Jung, there is tremendous amount of influence from Jean Piaget. I encountered Piaget in maybe one class. I think maybe we read one thing from him when I was doing undergrad, I think. And I never really paid a lot of attention to it. And then years later, I encountered him again in an odd way through looking at Egyptology. I'm not an Egyptologist. I don't really have that huge of an interest in Egyptology. I think it's interesting. I think the parallels between the Memphite creation narrative in Genesis and all that stuff is very fascinating. And I know a little bit about Egyptology. I'm certainly not any kind of expert, but I encountered some of this through a Egyptologist that I stumbled upon when I was looking at the parallels between how Egyptians also had this idea, probably what passes into Plato's Timaeus, of the microcosm and the macrocosm. So they had this idea that the human body, or maybe even Pharaoh, or as the image of Ra, that he's a microcosm of the macrocosm. And if you know about Plato's Timaeus, Plato says that the information in the Timaeus came from Solon, who was a Greek philosopher guy, statesman, who went and got the traditions of the Egyptians from their priests and brought that to the Greeks. And so the claim, at least in the Timaeus, is that the secrets of Platonism are actually the secrets of ancient Egyptology. So the notion then is that the Timaeus, which is the most famous of Plato's, the most famous of his not ever discussed dialogues, which for whatever everybody talks about, the other ones like Crito and, Phaedo and these other ones. But the Timaeus is his cosmogony, his philosophy, theology of the origin of the universe. And so a lot of things that you've already seen referenced in Dr. Peterson's lectures, like the Ouroboros, this is prominent in Plato's Timaeus. And other things come out of the Timaeus that you probably heard of, like the Platonic solids, the idea that the universe is in some way structured from its smallest level to its macro level. Again, another kind of macrocosm, microcosm relation. And for those that may be new to this, I'll show you briefly here the Platonic solids. You've probably seen this in geometry and mathematics. It comes up pretty frequently. That would be things like this. And if you watch the lectures and interviews that we've done with Father Vladimir, or the talk that we did with him live, then you've seen him analyze, a lot of the Renaissance art in regard to these Platonic solid structures, because this is a big part of Renaissance Neoplatonism and esotericism. Tetrahedron, octahedron, icosahedron, hexahedron, dodecahedron. And so we get, this fascinating, almost mysterious presentation in the Timaeus that the universe is in some way structured from its lowest levels to its highest levels. And for those that would like to support the show, by the way, I did see some of the super chats that came in overnight. Appreciate those. There you go. You can support the show there. Anyway, Platonic solids are very important in the Timaeus. Timaeus is a very difficult, enigmatic text, so it's definitely not. If you've not read Plato's dialogues, I wouldn't recommend. Sorry, the grasses are like the highest level grass pollen allergies they've ever been here in Tennessee. They're like at a 9 today. So I've already taken 2 organic allergy medicines, and it's like, it's not doing anything. So today is pretty rough. So you're just going to have to deal with it. Why is he always snorting? Because I'm attacked by a demon known as Pollen Boy. By the way, there's a horror movie that came out about a pollen demon. So maybe I should watch that. Maybe it's insightful into what's going on. The song in the intro is literally on the screen when the song's playing. So everybody's like, who does your intro music? It literally says on the screen who the artist is. So I don't know why people can't figure this out. Maybe people are new to this channel. They're like, why hasn't he started his live stream? Because I didn't. So that's how it is. Why is he so mean? Because I am. Meanest Man on the Internet Awards. So welcome, you guys. If you don't know, we did a previous two-part series on Peterson, and now we're continuing it with lecture 2. These are all half and halves, meaning that you get access to the first half here in the public section, and then you get access to the second half by subscribing to my member section on my website. For $4.95 a month, $6 a year. You can also subscribe on Rockfin as well. It's just a little different, but oftentimes it's the same content most of the time. A little bit of difference between the two, but the website has all of my archives going all the way back the last 8 or 9 years. So it was about 8 or 9, maybe 10 years ago when I was really reading this Egyptology stuff from one of the Egyptologists who made a lot of use of Piaget. And he pointed out that there's a parallel, he thinks, between what the representation of the Egyptian gods and the Ogdoad, the Henoad, the Decad, the 8, 9, 10 key deities, which sometimes people map onto the 10 Sephirot. Sometimes people map that onto the Porphyrian tree, kind of a structure of the universe, the tree of life structure. We saw that in the first part when we analyzed the Peterson talk. The other good news, too, is that I will finally be getting a table because I'm sick of this horrible glass table, and it has annoyed me for 3 years straight. So people ask, what does that sound? It is this stupid table. It's a glass table. And I appreciate Mom for giving it to me because it was a hand-me-down free glass table. I'm sure it was a nice, expensive table. But it's the worst possible table for live streaming. There you go. I just did a techno remix. The techno table remix for you guys. If you would hit like and share, we're covering nonsense. Just kidding. We're covering Jordan Peterson on Piaget. Anyway, so Piaget is most famous, as everybody knows, probably for child psychology and the locomotive aspects of how a child develops his motor functions and relationship of his body to the external world and learns things like depth perception, learns things like object permanence and so forth. And Peterson argues that there's a lot of philosophy. I don't know if he even calls it that, but as I'm hearing him lecture through Piaget, I'm like, well, these are just philosophical issues. And maybe that's why the Egyptology stuff that I was reading 10 years ago found a lot of parallel with Piaget. So I haven't read enough Piaget himself to know if he is Platonic or influenced by Neoplatonism. Certainly Carl Jung is Neoplatonic or influenced by Platonism. The archetypes will have their patterns and their predecessors in Platonic ideas as well as Gnostic ideas. And this isn't even controversial. Carl Jung's famous Red Book is explicitly a neo-Gnostic presentation. Furthermore, other texts like Carl Jung's Aeon, which interestingly Peterson references in in the next lecture. So the next lecture is on Carl Jung. Aeon, which I've not read I read the excerpt that I have in one of my books. It presents a dualistic, quasi-Luciferian ideology. Literally. And I'm not being sensational. Carl Jung in the essay explicitly says that Christ and Lucifer are the same. They're flip he says Antichrist is Christ. They're just kind of the same coin flipped from different perspectives. And that's part of the reason why Peterson, in the Carl Jung talk, which is the one after this, which we'll be covering in the part 2 for subscribers, Peterson says Jung is one of the most frightening thinkers of all time. He keeps using this. Jung's terrifying. Boy, he's absolutely terrifying. Right. And then ties it in with a lot of Nietzsche. Again, so the borders of psychology and philosophy are very blurred. And I don't have a problem with it. It's just that I don't know that Peterson's focus on psychology, it kind of translates into what he's saying philosophically. And ironically, some of the texts that I've been working through more recently that deal with metaphysics in the first 1,000 years of Christianity, it's actually dealing with the very things that Peterson is translating to his psychology audience in these lectures. So it's really weird, kind of a providential synchronicity, shall we say, Carl Jung. By the way, my rap name is Young Boomer, like Jung, Young Boomer. If you guys would hit like and share. Support the show via Streamlabs, by the way. The link is in the show description. Streamlabs is how we do super chats now since 2018. So we've been demonetized since 2018. So it's all through Streamlabs. So use the Streamlabs link if you guys would. By the way, I don't know why the volume was so low. It's like it resets. It's so annoying. Is that better? It's weird. So back to, Piaget, as we said, Peterson sees him as tremendously influential for Carl Jung. And when we get to Jung, we'll see why. But I wish Peterson had focused more on archetypes in the Jung lecture. He mainly talks about a lot of things that occurred in the 20th century to kind of scare people. And I guess he's just looking for events, Cold War, apocalypticism, whatever, that touches us on a deep level of our deepest seated fears. So he probably thought that was a more practical way to translate these ideas to his audience. But in regard to Piaget, he says that Piaget is interested in knowledge, which is interesting because, in the history of epistemology, what happens in the 20th century especially is that epistemology kind of capitulates to psychology and psychologism. And that's not to say that there aren't philosophers that, don't continue to do epistemology or analytical philosophy and, analytical epistemology or something like that. That does exist, but the predominant majority opinion, kind of is moving in that direction of scientism and Neil deGrasse Tyson's kind of, what's the point of philosophy? What's even the point of it? It's a waste of time. Right? So I'm talking in terms of like predominant percentages, right? More and more the study of psychology, and this is what we get in Quine, right? Quine's naturalized epistemology is really just psychology. And he says something to that effect, right? What's the point of epistemology anymore? We might as well just do psychology. We're just studying brain states. It's no longer about theory of knowledge, the status of knowledge, right? Meta-epistemology, that's all done, because that's all medieval stuff, right? Post-Kant, post-Hume, it's all done. So Peterson, again, is launching into a theory of knowledge, which is not really a theory of knowledge, but it's attempting to be via Piaget. I'm not saying that Peterson agrees in every part with Piaget, but we'll notice as he lectures through this that he is touching on epistemology issues while trying to remain in the domain of psychology. And so he says that Piaget is actually not so much focused on child psychology, which is what he's known for, but he actually wrote like vast volumes of text that deal with what we would call philosophical questions. What is knowledge is a pressing issue for Piaget. And in the process of modernity, knowledge is not a state, according to Piaget. So I detect from Peterson that we're moving into the domain of the pragmatic. We can learn things. We can know facts. And what is the law of this process, apparently, is one of the concerns of Piaget. And he launches into a discussion of Thomas Kuhn's scientific structure of scientific revolutions, which, as everybody knows, hopefully in this audience, famous text. It won awards because it was dealing with the fact that when new revolutionary ideas in science emerge, they are not immediately adopted on the basis of who has the best facts and logic. In fact, new ideas are almost universally dismissed and opposed. And that's because the entrenched paradigms don't want to give up the entrenched paradigm. And kind of makes sense in terms of, human weaknesses, why that would be. Nobody wants to be wrong. Nobody wants to give up their entrenched system. They cling to it. We see this in every debate, every time a position is challenged, every time somebody has their paradigm kind of collapsed and destroyed in a debate or, in a conversion situation. It's a very arduous struggle that people go through. It's a kind of death and resurrection, which Peterson referenced in the previous lecture, right? Converting from atheism to, something else, or from religion to atheism, right? That these processes are oftentimes can be very upending and tumultuous and a kind of death even. And so scientific revolutions are no different, a la the famous Kuhn book, which argues basically that we're all kind of stuck in our ivory towers, and we can't get out of these ivory towers because systems are incommensurate. They're incommensurable, they don't overlap, and so you have your system, I have my system, and so what happens is that one system just has to basically replace the old system. That's it. And that just happens over time as the old system wears down. But it's insightful because the book demonstrates that the way most normies, for example, think about how science works, all the scientism, soy Reddit people, doesn't work that way. There's not a high council of science that just investigates the objective facts and knowledge and then adopts the new correct position. Totally ridiculous, naive, and nonsensical, just given basic human nature. So I certainly think you could critique Kuhn's conclusion that, well, therefore, all paradigms are incommensurate and we can never be outside of our paradigms. Because Kuhn doesn't consider the possibility of transcendental arguments and comparing and contrasting paradigms as a whole, and that you can actually prove and disprove paradigms based on transcendental arguments. But Kuhn's book is great, it's illustrative, it's relevant for showing that there's no such thing as a theory-neutral objective science. Science is part of some paradigm. And thus, it cannot operate as a non-theory-laden adjudicator of truth, falsehood, fact, lie, etc. It's not possible. By the very virtue of what it is, it literally cannot do that. And you've seen us bring this up many times in debates with atheists, naturalists, when they bring up value judgments, when they try to have oughts derived from is. And so, Peterson understands that much at least because he recently brought it up with Sam Harris. But, Piaget, he's saying, then has this concern post, dealing with Kuhn stuff. Peterson, I'm saying, cites the Kuhn stuff. And then, so the idea here is that, well, children have sequences in stages of development. And this, of course, is what Piaget is mainly known for. But the idea here is that can we find a schema, a repeated pattern amongst many instances of events or perception of objects or the growth of a child, etc., that creates a mental structure, a schema. Maybe Kant's categories, which are just psychologized versions of Aristotle's categories, something like this that allows us to interpret and give meaning to the world. And so, this is probably, I haven't watched Maps of Meaning yet, but I assume this overlaps with Maps of Meaning and how we need underlying archetypal structures or universals or a law problem of the one and the many and so forth going back to Plato and the pre-Socratics, in order to predicate and have meaning at all. So again, although I've not gotten to maps of meaning yet, I'm assuming based on what I've just heard that that's probably the kind of direction that he will go in. And again, this is not surprising because, of course, Carl Jung does have Platonic influence. Let's see. He mentions constructivism, and he says that I'm assuming, I think he means our schemas, are they genetic? Like, what gives us meaning and perception and consciousness? Is it genetic or is it environmental? Maybe it's a false dialectic. He says the environment is actually an information field. I agree with that. We integrate that into our own inner information processor here. And so information in, information also is symbiotic. There's an active approach to knowing. You've heard me reference the Alvin Noe book, Action and Perception. That's one of the arguments of that book, is that there's a symbiotic relationship between perception not being just a blank slate receiving thing on our end, tabula rasa, but actually that there's an inactive approach, that we are active in perceiving. So that ties in also with Piaget, because in the Noe book, there's a lot of discussions of infant locomotion and how babies learn depth perception and stuff like that. So he argues that there's a pragmatic approach that Piaget has, which is that knowledge is not merely abstract or propositional, but that there is this learned experiential approach to knowledge, and thus infants and other, entities, creatures, presumably animals as well, infant animals, human babies, etc., they develop these schema and structures from experience, at least in part. Hence the pragmatic element here. Piaget is very pragmatic, Peterson says, and he's also interested in how you as an individual then apply the knowledge that you obtain. So I think there's definitely insights in this. That's why I was trying to translate it into, the Alvin Noe book, Action and Perception, because probably, and I haven't read that book in many years, but I mean, Piaget might even be cited in the book, I don't recall. I wouldn't be surprised, because it seems like they're interested in the same issues and questions. And then Peterson mentions that point I said about new information coming in and can conceivably then demolish older paradigms. And he likens this to when you're a child and, you're learning to move around the room and babies are crying and bumping into things. And then, so, you bump into something 3 or 4 times as a child, and it's a little mini traumatic experience. And so now you know not to try to run into the wall, because you can't run through walls like a Jedi in Minister Goats. So you've learned from this mini trauma to reconfigure how you go about interacting in the world. Solid objects do not allow me to pass through them. Thus, new information can demolish our paradigms, and then we reconfigure and restructure in our inner workings how we then act in the world. And he's saying that you can then take those principles that you apply to a child and their development of, locomotive functions and all that, and apply that on a bigger scale to what happens to, individuals when they are older and they encounter new information that, argumentation that demolishes their previous paradigm. I'm a Protestant and I encounter, arguments from the church fathers, and then my whole worldview collapses, something like this. Or Peterson also likens it to drug experiences where you have a really, explosive bad trip or something like that. Maybe not even a bad trip, and it, I did acid and I seen God, dude. Something like that. Your worldview changes. New information can thus demolish our paradigms and create a new kind of death, burial, resurrection, which he mentioned in the previous talk. Entrenched paradigms can resist change. That's the point of referring to Thomas Kuhn, as we said. And he's saying that that's how humans work. There was an interesting talk, too, about the limitations. Now, this was a 2015 lecture, and he goes into talking about DARPA dogs. So he's kind of hinting at transhumanism and AI and the capabilities and possibilities. And he did make a good point that even at that time, now maybe DARPA and MIT have overcome this difficulty, but he was making the point that a lot of things that we think, oh, computers are going to take over everything. Probably not. I mean, because even something that you might think is innocuous, like bussing a table, Peterson points out that that's a really complex task that, as far as he was arguing at that time, DARPA has not been able to create a robot that can successfully clean tables, right? Because it involves all kinds of, equations, I guess, to figure out, oh, this spill needs to be wiped, this glass is turned over, it needs to be turned up, and all this kind of stuff is very complex that you might think, oh, well, we could easily create, diner waitress bot.
You need more tater tots with that. Do you need more tater tots?
If you go in a diner, right, there's always a raspy cigarette voice woman in there.
You want more tater tots with that? Can I clean up your table?
Maybe y'all have never been into a diner or a greasy spoon in the South. Well, now Virginia Slim Grandma is going to be replaced with Virginia Slim Grandma Bot. Word. Straight busting tables, baby. Grandma will never, raspy Virginia Slim Tater Tot Grandma will never be replaced. You can quote Jordan Peterson on that one, baby. By the way, if you want to support the show via Streamlabs, you can use the Streamlabs function. We've only had one super chat. Everybody's being stingy today. It's okay. If you enjoy this, you can support me right there. And we are learning about Jean Piaget. Jean. That's the name of the diner raspy cigarette tater tot waitress.
Her name's Jean. Go on over there to Jean. Get you some more tater tots. Honey, you want some more coffee? You want me to top that coffee off, honey? Okay, darling. Tater tots.
Grow your own grandma, somebody said. Just kidding. Build your own grandma like Anakin built 3PO. Remember that? Are you an angel? Are you an angel? I'm going to be in the Buddha race.
Oh, Annie. Oh, Annie.
Oh, shit. What did I do? Oh, I hit the wrong button.
Oh, Annie.
I'm trying to remember some of Annie's stupid lines. He's got some real zingers when he's talking to Watto. Remember that? But I can't remember the dumb lines Annie has. He's always like, it's like Qui-Gon Jinn shows up and they're eating dinner and Annie is blurting out all this nonsense and bragging about the Bunta race, bragging about building a gay robot. It's like, Anakin, why would you build a gay British robot? Are you an angel? And then he's trying to spit game at Natalie Portman. And he says, "Are you an angel?"
Oh,
Annie. What's another one of Annie's lines? I've already forgotten. Are you my dad? Now this is podcasting, right? Who else is going to give you an Annie impression and a Watto impression out the middle of nowhere, bro? Not Little Orphan Annie. I'm talking about Anakin Skywalker, dude. Ain't you ever seen Phantom Menace, bro? Y'all ain't ever seen Phantom Menace? He's got some really dumb lines. I'm trying to remember some of the other lines. Anyway, I can't remember them off the top of my head. And then you got Liam Neeson over there making up bullshit, science, some midichlorian. His midichlorian count is off the charts. Midichlorian, dude. Faking gay. There ain't no such thing as midichlorians. That's a bunch of dang pseudoscience. Made up nonsense. Midichlorians. Give me a break, dude. You slept through Phantom Menace. What's another one of his funny lines? if you go back and watch Phantom Menace, Jamie and I watched it not too long ago. We were laughing at just how ridiculous Annie's lines are. He's just constantly blurting out all this nonsense, and he's constantly blurting and bragging. He's really annoying as a kid, but it's also funny when you watch it. Like, you go watch it, the movie is so cheeseball and corny that it'll make you laugh. And I don't know who's worse, Annie or Jar Jar. It's hard to say. Jar Jar is kind of like, he's come out, like, it's so bad that it's come out the other end, that it's good. You know what I mean? Like Jingle All the Way. Right? There's this rare class of movies that were like big kind of, theatrical release movies that are so bad that they actually come out the other end. It's like the Ouroboros of bad movies. It comes out the butt of that snake, that they're good. And I would actually class Phantom Menace as one of these. It's so bad that when you now go back and watch it, it's super entertaining. Anyway, maybe we could tie the midichlorians into this Jordan Peterson conversation. By the way, Jordan is all in the news today because the Canadian government has mandated that Dr. JBP has to go to re-education. I'm not joking. You can't make this up. I saw this headline today when I was putting this up about JBP, and I'm like, surely they wouldn't openly call it re-education? Oh, no, they do. No, it is re-education. Let's see what the news says here. Let's see what the normie news says. Normie news. Ontario court rules that Jordan Peterson must undergo media training. One of them called it re-education. Maybe that was just people on the Twitter calling it that. No, forced re-education. Let's see what this is. $75,000 signatures and counting on the petition calling on Ontario College of Psychologists to abandon the forced re-education. So this is him saying this, what, today? Is this today? Yeah, this is like a few minutes ago. Okay, so here's Jordan Peterson saying this a few minutes ago. That's pretty crazy. I mean, it's almost like in 2020, everything uncloaked in regard to like the globalization, global elites and all that. Everything they just fully uncloaked. All right, you got us. We want y'all dead. We're gonna use all the psyops to lock you down. We're gonna put you in re-education. Yeah. Okay, fine. It's like they just uncloaked. All right, fine. You got us. Yes, all the conspiracy theorists were correct, and everything that you conspiracy theorists said. Now, where's Jordan Peterson on the conspiracy stuff? Because multiple things that we've seen Jordan Peterson over the last 5 years shy away from, he's then had to come back around and say, oh, I guess you guys were right, but he still won't say conspiracy theorists are right. And, that's something that I am critical of. So I'm glad that Jordan Peterson has distanced himself from and rejected the sustainability climate scam stuff. Okay? But that means that I wasn't a conspiracy theorist, you see. That means I was correct because I said that was a globalist scam all along. Stabby's coof. Right about that. Guess what? When it comes to a lot of these other things that Dr. Peterson had RFK on, like the CIA and JFK, been right about that too. Been talking about that for 15, 20 years. Guess what? We're right about the other things too. Big Nine. MK Ultra. We're right about all those other things. So maybe we know about this other stuff that we've been talking about for 20 years that the normie people are just now figuring out. And I'm not knocking the normal persons for just now figuring it out. Come on into the hot tub. The water's warm and we've been waiting for y'all. But look, Don't be trying to take a bunch of credit like you broke these stories or figured all this shit out after calling us tinfoil hat kooks for the last 20 years. Ridicule, mocking, people losing their jobs, worse, over these topics for the last 20 years. This is the great era of vindications, the last 3 years especially. I can't even keep up with all of the conspiracies that have been correct. Like Harrison Smith made that video. He went through like 20 of them where we've been right. Guess what? There's more than that. Now, I didn't get everything right. Right? And that's part of what Peterson is getting into in this talk, actually, which is new information does, and ought to reorient our paradigm. However, as human beings, because we are fallen, in my view, we, by the way, it's 2014. I thought it was 2015. It's 2014 lectures. We often resist change. And I couldn't help but, as I listened to this lecture of Dr. Peterson, and I'm not knocking him when I say this, it's honest thoughts and criticism. Again, he says a lot of true things, but also I have some critiques. One of those critiques is, the very thing that you say here, in this and in the next lecture about Carl Jung, about being open-minded, highly open individuals, creative individuals, they ought to be open to information and going where the data leads, even if it's uncomfortable. Well, you mean like where we conspiracy theorists have been telling you for the last, what? How many years has Jordan Peterson been popular now? 2015, 16? Is that when he really started popping off? Okay, so we're almost 10 years. We're 8 years into the popularity of Peterson. And from that initial period, many conspiracy people who, many of them don't, I mean, does RFK, does he count as a conspiracy theorist? I mean, he's just so this is becoming the norm, and it's just more and more difficult to really make that boomer era label stick. It's such a boomer critique, right? Oh, he's a conspiracy theorist. Because look, we're in the age of the internet. This stuff comes out. People are figuring all this out at faster and faster speeds. Yes, there's a lot of normies. It's still taking people too long to figure out stuff. But look, this profile who promotes my stuff, inversionism, he put up the other day this, look, right? And I'm going to share it with you guys. I mean, we're at the point where, this gets thousands of likes, over 1,000 shares in no time. The conspiracy theorist title was concocted by the CIA to manage perception and destroy the credibility and character of the people questioning the JFK event. So what's interesting is that even if you don't believe the narrative of conspiracy, even if you think the official story of JFK is the case, why would the CIA have to concoct an entire psychological operation geared towards discrediting and attacking the people who were questioning the Warren Commission back in the 60s? Ergo, conspiracy theorist is a CIA-created term, a weaponized term, just like Tavistock and other entities weaponize terms like isolationism. Right, that's part of what they do at Tavistock. Been talking about that for how many years? Lord Voldemort talked about it yesterday. And there you have it. Weaponized term, conspiracy theorist. In other words, they were raising good questions. And so rather than deal with their questioning of the JFK event, destroy them and their character. This was in the 1960s. The late 60s is this CIA document. It was declassified in 93. It's a 1967 CIA document. So, do you understand? This is Mockingbird stuff. We just covered Mockingbird. I've got the freaking Wilson. I've been reading the Mockingbird book by the dude that wrote the book on it. We did a whole talk on that. We broke down, look, this is not new, guys. I mean, you think mainstream media is corrupt. Trump called it out. It's been corrupt for back to frickin' Rockefeller, Howard, Hearst. What are you talking about? Quigley talks about mainstream media and publications being corrupt for the last 100 years. Quigley says in Anglo-American Establishment that the British elite, the Rothschilds, etc., they bought off all of the major publications in the UK in the 1890s. And it's like, what are you talking about? The media is corrupt. Whoa. Welcome to level 1 of what we've researched and talked about for 20 years. So, now I'm not being mean or rude. I'm happy that people are waking up to it. But look, y'all need to get up to speed. And you need to get out of this childish, ridiculous attitude of trying to take credit for stuff that people have been putting out for 20, 30 years or more. Acting like y'all figuring this stuff. You didn't figure this stuff out. You made fun of everybody who talked about it, dissed everybody who talked about it for the last 20 years. All right. So Peterson needs to, I think, get up to speed on this stuff. Daily Wire and all those people, they don't want to touch. They don't want to talk about conspiracy, even though it's in everybody's face. So, I mean, I'm sorry that boomers can't deal with conspiracy. It's just a reality. And it's not my fault that y'all were super conditioned. Okay? Conspiracies are real. Doesn't mean they're all real. There's a lot of disinformation. There's a lot of dumb stuff out there. But that itself is also a conspiracy theory or an actual conspiracy, I should say. Because I can give you the paper that Cass Sunstein wrote about how to, this is an updated form of what you see in the document by the CIA, where Cass Sunstein is tasked with and gives the philosophy for how to disrupt online truth communities by interjecting false misinformation conspiracy theories. I read this paper back when it came out. This came out in 2008. Here it is. You guys can go read it. Maybe learn how this stuff works. He was Obama's one of Obama's czars, and then he went on to the NSA. Conspiracy theories. How they work, and then how to undo them by interjecting false conspiracies into their internet cultures, meme groups, thread groups, forums, etc. I mean, I've been studying this for a long time. I'm pretty sure I understand how this stuff works. But we got all these people who don't know anything, or they're new to all this, and it's just hard to get through to these people. But the irony, again, if we want to be open to new information, then you can't be locked into a paradigm that shuts out the information that people like myself talk about. And Peterson himself says you should be open to these kinds of pieces of information in these talks. So I'm just holding him to what he says. So Piaget, as we said, was interested in mind-body interrelations and how they relate to material things. And there was an interesting bit in this lecture that dealt with criticisms of AI and transhumanism and how, there's a lot of this stuff isn't really going to do what they claim it's going to do. So that I agree with. I thought that was a really good insight there. Humans imitate. Babies learn by imitation. Pearson launches into an interesting talk about impressions and people doing impressions and how we do that when we're babies. We imitate, adults, people that we look up to when we're kids. This is part of how humans learn. This was something that Piaget was very interested in. And so Peterson then ties that into the way that humans construct archetypes. One thing that Peterson doesn't touch on in this talk is the actual ontological status of archetypes. which I'm interested in. What does he think they are? Where does he think they're located? Are they in the divine mind? Are they purely human mental constructs? Is he a Platonist where there's an ethereal, impersonal, ideal realm? We'll have to see. But at this point, he's just dealing with Piaget's schemas that are constructed out of an infant learning the way that he can operate in the world. And the reason I brought up the Egyptology stuff is because I was saying many years ago I read a bunch of this guy's Egyptology philosophy, which is fascinating. I think this guy is he's a perennialist. Certainly I'm not agreeing with or accepting all of his perennialist views. But in Wim van den Dungen, the perennialist Egyptology guy, he has a lot of analyses of Egyptology and Egyptian philosophy, how it influenced, for example, Thales and Anaximander, Pythagoras. So the pre-Socratics, people like this, they're dealing with questions that weren't necessarily made up by them, but a la the Timaeus could have potentially come from Egypt. And again, it's been probably 10 years since I read any of Van den Dungen's stuff, but to my best recollection, and I think I cited him in some of my essays, his idea is that it is true that Platonism, he argues, is Egyptology. So I'm sure scholars would say, oh, in the Timaeus, this is a myth. This is all made up. Anyway, what does this have to do with what we're talking about? Well, he makes a lot of interesting parallels to Piaget. And you'll notice here he talks about my own understanding of the philosophy of Egyptology is that it comes from, my contribution is from epistemology to Egyptology, layering the cognitive growth in modes of thought which develop in stages. This is the genetic approach of Piaget. So he utilizes the structures that we find in Egyptology and the gods of Egypt as mapping onto archetypal figures. And Peterson does that as well. Again, I've not read enough Piaget to know if Piaget himself has any association with Egyptology. But as we saw in the early Peterson lectures, Peterson makes this connection. So perhaps Peterson has read Dungen. I don't know. Van den Dungen. But he says, the father, Peterson, that is, Peterson takes his Piaget lecture to talking about the father, the great father, how the great father plays this role in society. This, again, in the earlier Peterson talks, was from Egyptology. Cites. Oh, Peterson brings in these other kind of random, I don't know why he brings in Taoism, but he brings in these random statements about Taoism that all things are no thing, which I think is a nonsense statement. And he says, he has this example of the Taoists that if you had every symphony ever on a recording and you layered it to have all of them playing at once, it would be white noise. And so therefore all things are no thing. This is a ridiculous category mistake in terms of metaphysics. So the fact that a bunch of things sounds being made at once that then become incoherent does not mean that the sounds disappear. They're still there. And it doesn't mean that they're no thing, right? So bringing in the weird Taoist, pseudo contradictions. I don't know why he brings that in. But humans imitate, humans develop through imitation. We learn this from planned sequences of behaviors. Babies want to get from point A to point B. They do this many times, and the structures their way of doing this, and then they create schemas. And this is how it's adopted into Van den Dungen's Egyptology, which is, so the baby, for example, has a father and a mother, and so multiple years of interactions between mom and dad, the baby develops this schema, this mental structure about the relationship that's proper to the mom and to the dad. Thus, the child develops the father archetype, which is a real archetype, but exactly what it means to be real, we don't know yet. We're going to have to wait and see where Peterson goes in the next talk. So, we had a couple super chats. Renegade Ranga 865. Thank you so much for that. AC sends $5 I think, no, that was from last time. BMX, $30. Thank you so much. BMX is always a faithful super chat. Appreciate that. Guys, if you would hit like and share. Also, remember to head on over to chalk.com. That is chalk.com with CHOQ.com to get access to the best supplements out there, like the Shilajit 100. By the way, I've been chatting quite a bit with Sam Hyde, and we're going to try to figure out a way that I can go train under the Candyman himself. But we got to figure out who I can box against. So Sam and I have been chatting about that, and he's like, look, you got to start running. So I've actually been running, which I hate to do. But I got to get up to like 20 laps, which is crazy. Freaking hate running, dude. I love exercise. It's just I don't like to run. I don't mind basketball because basketball is not essentially running. It is essentially putting the ball in the hoop. Running is part of it, but it's the unfortunate part of it. Anyway, but look forward to that. I look forward to that. So if we can make that work, it's going to be a lot of fun. There was something else I had with Vandendungen. Can't remember. I think we need to save this. I was going to talk about E. Wallace Budge and Egyptian temples. There's parallels, actually, between Egyptian worship temples and the way that God had the Old Testament temple structured. And I'm not saying that the Jews ripped off the Egyptians. No, to the contrary, probably Egyptians ripped off the Jewish worship, in my view. But that's a whole other issue, too, about biblical history and chronology. Cedric says for $5, I love your work. The recent hype on the civilizations that are lost in ancient Egypt, it might be a psyop with UAP stuff. Yeah, I just think that when it comes to a lot of ancient lost civilizations, we just don't know enough about it. It's very speculative. I find it all very fascinating. And, I'm open-minded about the various possibilities of, could ancient civilizations have had advanced technology? I suppose that's possible. I mean, I don't know. There's a lot of inexplicable megaliths that are out there. Now, some of the megaliths are explicable. There's easy ways through, pulley systems and, various weights and measures to build and move giant blocks without having to have levitation technology or ancient alien garbage. But perhaps there were advanced ancient civilizations. I'm always open-minded about anything, right? Like, we're going to be doing some upcoming, ghost streams. And like I said, it looks like there's a lot of videos that don't look to be doctored, where it looks like there's some genuine paranormal stuff going on, probably demonic stuff, right? So, I'm not a closed-minded person, but I've also seen a lot of jibber jabber and nonsense, and the whole domain of lost civilizations, ancient civilizations, Nephilim, Anunnaki. It's just fraught with a bunch of kooks and con men. So it would be nice if an open-minded person could, in some way, combine that with academia. If I become a Bitcoin zillionaire one day, I'll just take a few years and try to write a scholarly approach to ancient civilizations, and I'll go on some kind of quasi Indiana Jones quest, like a wannabe LARP as Indiana Jones or something, and go study megaliths. I don't know, it just sounds fun. But all right, so head on over to chalk.com, CHOQ.com, get a hold of the Tongkat. Use the promo code J50, right? If you use JAY50, you get 50% off. They've also got the cacao beans. They've also got the chocolate, as you see right here. Great products. You can add that chocolate to your daily smoothie regimen or to whatever dessert tastes like chocolate. No sugar, none of that stuff. You get the Action 2.0 to boost your energy levels. Use the promo code J50, JAY50 to get 50% off. Also, remember to check out our sister shows and podcasts like Grand Theft World over at Rockfin. My buddy Richard Grove has been killing it over there with Grand Theft World, one of the best podcasts that you can find out there when it comes to covering a lot of the geopolitical topics. I'll give you his link right here. Be sure and subscribe to him over on Rockfin. He and Tony are putting out some killer content on a regular basis. I'm a little bit behind. I've not been able to catch up to the quality that Richard puts out. But there's the link on Rockfin. You can also subscribe to me at Rockfin, which is one of the best free speech-based platforms out there, ROKFIN. You get access to everybody if you do the paid subscription on Rockfin, including myself, Sam Tripoli, Whitney Webb, Richard Grove, Isaac Weishaupt, tons and tons. My wife Jamie, you might have heard of her. Tons and tons of cool people over on Rockfin, so be sure and subscribe there. Also follow me on Twitter. Shout out to myself. I'm laughing like waxing over here. Hey, dude, what if I roll up on your girl like this? I hit 50K, baby. Thank you all to the audience, to y'all people out here. We hit 50K right there. Shout out. Couldn't have done it without y'all. We're getting quite a bit of growth on Twitter. And that's been pretty good. So happy about that. Seems like everywhere else it's hard. I mean, Rockfin's great, but in terms of like the mainline platforms, it's just really hard to grow. And Twitter seems to be really good for me in terms of growth. So be sure and get over there if you're not on my Twitter. You can always get, as we said, the philosophy course. Philosophy course is also through Autonomy Agora. That's Richard's site right there, Reason University, Autonomy Agora Marketplace. You can get my full philosophy course, 30 plus hours of lectures and Q&A right there on the history of Western philosophy from the pre-Socratics all the way up to the Nietzschean postmodern period. Mr. Anderson. $5. Have you read Pharrell's Giza book? I read it 10 years ago. So yeah, I've read a lot of those texts. I think it's very speculative. I do not believe that the pyramids were weapons. Doesn't mean that I'm not open to various people's megalithic theories, but don't believe that it was a weapon. So if you guys would hit like and share, and if you want access to the second part of this, you can subscribe to my website, Jay's Analysis. It's in the show description. And we will be covering Peterson on Carl Jung.